The station was empty, save for the occasional flicker of the fluorescent lights and the soft hum of an overhead fan. Ethan cursed under his breath as he checked his watch one last time. Midnight. He'd missed the last train home. With a resigned sigh, he took a seat on a bench near the platform, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets as he tried to ward off the chill of the night air. There was an unsettling silence in the empty station, broken only by the occasional rustle of paper as a gust of wind swirled through the area. He closed his eyes, letting his mind wander to the day he'd had. A long, tiresome work shift, late dinner with friends, and that feeling of wanting to just be home. But as he opened his eyes and scanned the station, he realized he wasn't entirely alone. Across the platform sat a young woman, her eyes fixed on the tracks, as if waiting for a train that would never come. She looked familiar, though he couldn't place her. Her long hair fell softly around her shoulders, and there was a serene stillness about her, like she belonged to another world. Ethan felt a strange pull, an unexplainable urge to talk to her. After a moment's hesitation, he stood up and walked over to her. "Missed the last train too?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. She looked up, her eyes meeting his with a flicker of recognition that took him aback. It was as if she'd been expecting him, as if she'd known he would be there. "Seems like it," she replied, her voice soft, almost ethereal. "Looks like we're both stuck here for the night." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of the unspoken hanging between them. Finally, Ethan spoke up. "I feel like I've seen you before," he said, frowning slightly as he searched her face. "Do we know each other?" The girl tilted her head, studying him with a curious expression. "Maybe," she said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Or maybe we're just remembering something we can't quite place." Ethan chuckled, though he wasn't sure why. The way she spoke was so familiar. It was unsettling yet comforting at the same time. They continued talking, sharing snippets of their lives, their likes and dislikes, little stories of mundane things. Yet with every word, every laugh, something stirred within Ethan, a feeling he couldn't shake. It was as if he knew her, not just knew, but felt an undeniable connection, like she was a missing piece he hadn't known he'd lost. And then, as they talked, fragments of memories began to surface. A dance under the moonlight, laughter echoing through a forest, a whispered promise by the river. He couldn't make sense of it, but every memory felt real, as though he had lived them with her. "Do you remember anything strange?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The girl's gaze dropped, her expression distant. "Sometimes I dream of a life that feels like it was mine, yet not mine," she murmured. "A life where I was waiting for someone who never came." Ethan's heart tightened. A sudden memory flashed before him, vivid and painful. The two of them standing at the edge of a cliff, hand in hand, looking out at a stormy sea. They were saying goodbye. He looked at her, his voice shaky. "I think I was the one you were waiting for." The girl's eyes widened, tears glistening as she looked up at him, her lips trembling. "And I think I was waiting for you, even after I was gone." They sat in silence, both reeling from the revelation. It was a love that spanned lifetimes, separated by fate, and yet here they were, reunited by a missed train and the quiet solitude of a station at midnight. "What happened to us?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The girl's gaze drifted back to the tracks, her expression sad yet calm. "We were in love, but life pulled us apart. You left, promising to return, but you never did. I waited, and waited, until the waiting was all I knew." Here Ethan's chest ached, as if he could feel the weight of the years she had spent waiting. He didn't know how to make it right, but he felt an overwhelming need to try. "Maybe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Maybe this is our second chance." The girl looked at him, her eyes hopeful and yet filled with a lingering sadness. "Do you really think that we're meant to try again?" He reached out, gently taking her hand. "I don't know, but I'd like to believe that maybe this time we'll get it right." They stayed like that, hand in hand, as the night wore on, each feeling the connection between them grow stronger, a bond that felt as old as time itself. As dawn approached, a faint light began to filter through the station. The first train of the day rumbled in the distance, its sound echoing through the platform. Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding. "Will you come with me this time?" The girl smiled, a bitter-sweet expression that tugged at his heart. She looked down at their hands, her fingers intertwined with his. For a moment, she seemed to waver, caught between staying and letting go. "I want to," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But I don't belong here, Ethan." The weight of her words hit him like a punch. He understood now. She wasn't like him. She was a memory, a ghost of his past life, brought back to give him closure. But even knowing that, he couldn't bear to let her go. "Please," he whispered, desperation lacing his voice. "Stay with me." She leaned in, pressing her lips softly to his, and for a brief, beautiful moment, it felt like they had bridged the distance between life and death, between past and present. When she pulled away, there were tears in her eyes, and she whispered, "I'll always be with you, Ethan. No matter where you go, I'll be there." As the train pulled into the station, the early morning light washed over the platform. Ethan blinked, his vision blurry with tears. He looked around, but she was gone. The only trace of her was the warmth still lingering in his hand. He boarded the train, his heart heavy yet full of a strange sense of peace. As he watched the station disappear behind him, he whispered to the empty seat beside him, "I'll find you again. In this life or the next, I'll find you." And somewhere, in a place beyond his reach, he felt her smile, waiting for the day they would meet again.